Yeah, so I graduated high school in 2003, and I joined the Marine Corps right afterwards. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and yeah, I joined the Marine Corps right after 9/11. I figured it's like my patriotic duty to fight terrorism, and that especially that time frame was very intense. It's a very patriotic time frame. That's when I joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah, and then we talked a little bit about your journey into, a bit of a spiritual awakening that led you to Peru. And we really got into a lot of the science, the neurology and cognitive science, and even some psychology behind the benefits of things like brain mapping and the effects of, ayahuasca, for example. We talked a little bit about and your experience the first time you were a part of one of those ceremonies. So, yeah, I guess I would love to kind of pick back up where we left off, which was about brain mapping. So, if you kind of want to start there with the bare basics.
Yeah, so a friend in Omaha, Nebraska did a brain map of me about 2014, I think, right after Afghanistan, and I think pretty around the same time of my first ayahuasca experience.
Mhm.
And the brain map showed a high beta pattern in the posterior, in the back of the brain, and this pattern is associated with PTSD. And it was actually very empowering for me because I realized that, oh, this is a brain pattern I can work on. And this isn't like a, I think a lot of times a psychological diagnosis is something more deep and you have to go down and figure out your childhood and do a talk therapy. But, oh, it's a brain pattern. And the idea is I can train it. I can train it away with neurofeedback. So that was very empowering to me. And it gave me a path forward that really resonated with me.
Yeah, let's, if you could, because I've never done this, I read a ton. I didn't realize how much more research had been published since the last time I looked into brain mapping. But can you walk through kind of the process? What happens when someone maps your brain? Like, what is the, like, what are they doing? Are they attaching nodes or you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, so generally how we do it, and there's different kind of styles, but for there's different kinds of brain imaging, but the kind we use, we read brain waves. So we put a 19-point electrode cap on, and it reads your brain waves in 19 locations in the head, so it covers the whole head. So front, back, side to side, and it reads your brain waves, and there's 4 or 5 major brain waves: delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. And how your brain waves appear in different parts of the brain tells us a whole lot about that person. We can see a whole lot about what's going on. We can see there's markers for anxiety, there's markers for depression, there's markers for, so many different things, focus issues, and we can train the brain to be more healthy. That's the idea. But when you see the brain waves, it's very empowering because you can see, like, oh, here's where I'm dysregulated, and we try and find solutions to help them get better.
So, as the patient or client who goes to get a brain map, what are the results that you're presented with? Because obviously, you can't. Most people can't interpret the raw data.
Yeah, so we do a QEEG. So the raw EEG is kind of what you've seen in like a hospital or maybe a movie of the raw brainwaves. We
Mhm.
pass it through a filter. Maybe not, well, it does filter it, but it passes it through a software, compares it to hundreds of thousands of other maps, or a large database, basically.
Mhm.
And so, actually, after studying hundreds of thousands of maps, we know what different things look like. Depression, like I said, all these different things. So, um, when you look at it, someone as a practitioner, we know what these different patterns look like. So it's a topographical map of the brain. So I see the delta waves, I see the theta waves, I see the alpha waves and beta waves. And I see all these different markers, and it takes a little expertise to read them, but once you can read it, it's a very powerful tool. And then when I talk to the client or patient, they can they usually get a lot out of it. Like, oh, okay, this is why I have trouble, focusing on tasks. So I have a pattern that gives me trouble from focusing, right? For example,
Mhm.
or so usually most people aren't surprised. It's actually, okay, yeah, I'm experiencing depression and that patterns in the brain. So it allows us a lens to view it. And I think it's become more and more powerful because different brain imagery, like for example MRIs, is like blood flow. But with brain waves, there's so much subtleties in it. This will just get more and more advanced over time. So we'll read more about it.
Yeah. So, and correct me if I'm wrong here. So, someone might receive results that say that you have certain brain waves that are consistent with other individuals who have depression. Like, there are patterns amongst the data, is what I'm assuming. So when they,
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I mean, very much statistical. So we've done like questionnaire surveys with people's brain maps, and that's probably how they first did it. Where they noticed people with depression tend to exhibit this pattern, and over time, we've developed the science behind that in the studies. We understand why the brain changes in that way. So
Yep.
it goes into the theory of brain structure and brain physiology combined with like neuropsychology.
Mhm.
But basically, when trauma happens to the brain, stress happens to the brain, each brain manifests in a different way. So, for example, someone with ADD might have trauma in the system and they're avoiding it by like not being focused. Or some people might have a busy mind, or some people might worry. And those patterns are very obvious in the brain, and there's shifts in the brain when that happens. So depression is actually a subconscious avoidance mechanism, so they don't feel as much, so they don't feel that trauma as much. So part of the healing process is going to feel more and moving the brain in that direction.
Yeah, and I remember last time we talked about kind of the impact trauma has on the brain, and there's tons of research now that shows this, but we see that like things like PTSD or emotional or psychological trauma manifests itself as almost as a physical injury. So when I used to do clinical assessments on cognitive deficits and quality of life, we found that intense emotional, psychological trauma, especially amongst veterans who are experiencing or PTSD or exhibiting signs of depression, that their brains would look like someone who had been physically injured. Not not to mention a lot of them have like TBIs and things like that. So there is
Yeah.
sometimes actual structural issues and damage, and we find that they have the same deficits as someone who maybe experienced a stroke. So I'm curious. Someone comes in, let's say, so they get their brain mapped, and you see kind of these areas of, I guess I don't want to say concern, but areas of focus.
Yeah.
What does a potential, I don't want to say treatment plan, but how do you determine the steps to take to try and correct these areas of focus?
So yeah, it's very interesting when we talked about like trauma holds itself in the physical body. So there's a famous book called "The Body Keeps the Score."
Mm-hmm.
That trauma exists in the body and exists in the brain. So someone with a lot of emotional trauma, it could damage the brain as much as say alcohol or drug abuse or TBI, because that unresolved trauma, that brain's constantly stressed to try to release it, and that stress creates a certain imbalance where basically the brain can't rest, so it can't do proper wasteful removal. It's constantly on high alert, and the chemical structures are wearing out the brain, like the stress hormones. So yeah, so it can be like an issue where a person might have PTSD that goes untreated for 10 years, and they're seeing cognitive deficits because of that. At the same time, if you help someone with um, those emotional trauma, and the emotional brain is the core part of the brain, it can heal the rest of the brain, because that's a core part, and then the cognitive parts are on top of that, the cortex, stuff like that. So when I do a brain map, it's like a road map. And it's so cool, it's so powerful. I think most people like in the field of behavioral health, cognitive health, mental health, they should definitely be using this, because I think it allows, it's such a powerful tool. I mean, I look at psychiatrists who prescribe medication without looking at a brain map. There's like a doctor prescribing heart medication, without taking someone's blood pressure. I think it's
Yeah.
crazy, because every medication does. But for me, how I treat is through training the brain. That's when the neurofeedback comes in. Neurofeedback's the core of what we do. It's where we put electrodes in the head and we train the brain to become more healthy. So, areas of focus, we look at ways they're dysregulated. Like that part of the brain is dysregulated. We want to bring it into like a healthier state, or more into that normative state where they can function better. We know what those states are. So we train the brain to become more healthy. For example, like ADD is really easy to treat with neurofeedback, classic ADD. Because the classic pattern is a high theta pattern globally, where they can't focus, and they lack a focus pattern, which is like low beta. So we simply train that high pattern down, the high theta, and we train that focus pattern up. So instead of a kid being on powerful drugs their whole life, we could train their brain within a few months, and ideally get into a state where they're operating effectively.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned The Body Keeps Score. I have that book. I haven't read it, but I've watched a ton of interviews by, and I can't remember his name. It's Van Burton, I think. I'll post it in the comments or in the description. But yeah, I've watched a ton of his interviews where he talks about concepts of how the body will retain the stress of trauma, and even as it relates to like the flashbacks of the event, even if it's something minor, just over time, those minor events add up. So um, I was also talking to kind of on another point that you made. I was talking to a philosopher in my last podcast episode, and we talked a little bit about ADHD.
Yeah,
And I sometimes wonder. I've seen some other like non pharmacological interventions for things like ADHD, and for
yeah.
me as a kid, it was drawing. So I wonder what that brain map would have looked like before and after that sort of intervention. I mean, obviously there are some situations where an integrative approach would be required, medication in conjunction with something that, like you're saying, kind of brings you back down to like a normal pattern. But so for the neural feedback, so is that done after the brain map is done?
Yeah, so generally speaking, you take a brain map, and that's the roadmap, and that gives me an idea of what areas of the brain I want to train.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, I'm like a personal trainer for the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like going to a brain gym. They do neurofeedback training. They can feel tired afterwards. Often people need to take a nap or something, or like the same thing as you go to the gym. You need to make sure you're eating healthy foods because you're changing those brain structures, healthy fats, eggs, grass-fed meat, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, like 3 months of training gets most people where they want to go. It's like 3 sessions a week, and I train people remotely, all around the world where they have their own home training device. I send them the mail. And today the technology is more advanced. Before it would take like a big machine in a clinic, but now it's a lot more portable, which is very cool. And I also use in conjunction with plant medicines because both of them use neuroplasticity. So it adds that kind of like that holistic approach, like you're talking about. And some people with a brain map, I might advise a certain meditation for them. So it's not always neurofeedback. Some people might not be able to afford it, or they might not be ready for that. So I can advise, okay, with this brain map, this kind of meditation would be good for you, or this kind of diet would be good for you, or I can advise lifestyle choices. And it's very powerful because then it empowers them to be the best them. That's the whole point of the brain map, is to like give them the tools to be the best selves.
Yeah, one thing that I was completely fascinated with, and I haven't had a chance to finish reading the study, but the Mayo Clinic came out with a very interesting study in that brain mapping and neural feedback has actually helped neurosurgeons, has helped the outcome of neurosurgery. It helps them, like you're saying, like get a better visualization of what they're about to do, as well as better diagnose certain like actual physical lesions that require some sort of invasive procedure. But they talk a lot about the this sort of non-invasive approach to any sort of neurological or cognitive deficits that could completely prevent the need for surgery. So I'm sure, and that came out, I think it was 2022. So I'm waiting for the additional studies and see if that was able to be replicated. But I thought it was just an interesting concept. And a place like Mayo Clinic implementing that is, they're not the first to do stuff, right? The research has to
Yeah.
be there. Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. You got to send me that study because,
Yeah.
most of the time, for the last 30 years, neurofeedback is kind of like a small little group of people doing what they think is like a super amazing, but the mainstream scientific community hasn't picked up on it yet. I think there's been over 300 studies about the effectiveness of neurofeedback. That's really cool that they're doing it. I can see that in many different ways because I know when they're trying to do like surgery, for example, like with Parkinson's, they might put electrodes in the brain, actually put like electrical currents into the brain.
Yeah.
That's hugely invasive. And we can do so much neurofeedback, which is not invasive at all. We teach the brain how to become more healthy. And people have been working that for a long time, and people in neurofeedback just specialize with Parkinson's, for example. So lots of those invasive surgeries that cost, who knows, hundreds of thousands of dollars, it can be really treated with neurofeedback in a non-invasive way. And I also the neurofeedback, what's really cool about it is when I'm training the brain, I'm seeing the brain change each session. I'm watching those brain waves. So each time they're training, I'm seeing how the brain aligns. I'm seeing how the brain moves in a healthy state. Where if you put electrodes in someone's brain, for example, or invasive surgery, you're not going to know the changes maybe until like you do another brain imaging or brain map, where you have to like track symptoms in a certain way, questionnaires or different kinds of like cognitive tests. So yeah, I think brain mapping can be really good. But also I kind of thought about it too. You're talking about like a surgeon, right? He's like he needs to be a peak performer in his field. So brain neurofeedback can really help him out because it'd make him like much better at what he does. And we work with peak performance with people like that too.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, when I did a little bit more research last night because there were so many references that I found, and I'm going to put all of them in the blog post, which will be in the link in the description, because there were a ton of, I guess, therapeutic clinics that are hosted or endorsed by major universities that are utilizing neural feedback to help patients all over the spectrum. And I would love to see the VA pick up something like that because I think it would really help out veterans. So, but I'm curious. So after you went through like this process, what was the like the plan? Like what was it like for you to go through, having brain mapped, being able to like pretty much see the areas of trauma and then work on those things?
Well, it was such a powerful tool when I use it myself. I want to use it with other people. It became really obvious that I tried so many different things. I never went the pharmaceutical route or the traditional route for PTSD, and for some people that's what they need to do, and that's and obviously that has its place. But that was something called to me, and I was looking for like yoga, meditation, all these different things. And then the problem with yoga and meditation is that when there's so much trauma in the system, it's very hard to get into those states. But with the brain training, I can see those states. I can see where the trauma is at, and I can like train the brain how to go into these deeper states. So immediately when I started doing it, I felt relief almost within a few sessions. Like in each session, this huge tension in my body kept lifting, and I started reading more about it. Like what is this? And eventually, I started meeting people in the field, and that's where I met my mentor. I met him in Denver over 5 years ago now, and I told him about my ideas, and he said, "I'll train you." I think because like, my idea was combining it with plant medicines. What I'm doing now, he's like, "That's a beautiful idea. I want to train you. I want to work with you," and that's where it led to. But I think the coolest thing about neurofeedback, as much as I love so many different treatments, I love plant medicines, I love ayahuasca, and I love meditation. All these things can be very effective. But neurofeedback, every time I'm working with someone, I can see how their brain is changing, and you don't always get that with talk therapy. You can't really see sometimes like did it work, did it not work, where am I at? And that's what's cool about the brain imaging. You can see exactly what's going on.
Yeah, I think tangible results are sometimes helpful because it's less interpretive. It's I agree. I think sometimes when we look at therapy, especially talk therapy, it's when a situation similar to the event that you and your therapist are talking about, unless it happens again or you're presented with a similar challenge, do you really get to see if you've changed or grown or whatever based on that experience. So it's like if this triggered you, then the next time you go there, does it trigger you again? And it's very immersive. And I think sometimes it can be jarring for someone who is going through that kind of like emotional or spiritual journey. So I'm curious. So, okay, so after so let's say there's multiple areas that are kind of, let's say, out of focus, I forget the term that you used. And, they have ADHD. They've also experienced some sort of trauma that's manifesting itself as PTSD or even depression. Are you able to work on each of those things at the same time in terms of lowering waves, increasing waves, and things like that?
Yeah, so that's where a good practitioner comes in. So there's multiple things going on. you want to choose where you can make the most impact in the fastest way. So someone might have a head trauma, and they might have depression, they might have these different things going on. And the idea is like, I have a brain map, here's where I want the brain. It's finding that the quickest course or best course possible. So often I go after the areas I think are the most dysregulated. That I think that this person benefits the most from quickly. Some things might take more time, for example, like head trauma. A diet is actually very important for that because they need to rebuild those structures of the brain. So diet and coaching in that aspect with the brain training is important. And often, like you mentioned, that a lot of people have PTSD and head trauma, for example. Those things go really hand in hand. And the cool thing with the brain training is you just start working on the brain as soon as everything starts becoming better. So I might be training one thing, the PTSD, but the head trauma is becoming better. I can see those brain waves regulate. So it's kind of like a mirror being put in front of the brain. You're showing a healthier direction. You might be training one thing, but all the other parts of the brain are rebalancing to get to that one place. So the whole brain is like re-editing itself all the time to become more healthy and wants to become more healthy. And it's very intuitive. And it's the first time in its life it's been shown how to do it in a very efficient way. So, for sometimes when I treat people or with people with brain training, like, okay, I worked with this and I see like there's kind of sometimes layers to it. Okay, like we worked through that, and now there's a different thing we can work on. So there's kind of layers to mapping, but generally speaking, that when you start training the brain, if you're doing it the right way, everything starts aligning, everything starts becoming better.
Yeah, I'm curious if there's any talk, at least amongst the field, of potentially utilizing a similar technology or methodology for early onset dementia. Because it sounds like a lot of this, at least what I've read and now that we're talking, is rooted in creating new neural pathways. That's that plasticity that we talked about. And that is sometimes what is lacking in someone with any variety of dementia. So I'm curious if there's any, I don't even know what an IRB for that would look like, but it'd be interesting to see. But on another note, do you want to talk a little bit about your mentor? Because I did look him up, and he's a heavy hitter in the industry.
Yeah, no, I mean he really is. I'm very blessed to have met him. It was a beautiful synchronicity. His name is Dr. Richard Suter. He has his own neurofeedback company called New Mind Technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met him, I looked him up later. I'm like, is he really going to work with me? He's this big guy. He's read a number of books and stuff. And sure enough, he starts working with me because he's really passionate about what I want to do. And for him, I'm kind of like a field researcher exploring stuff in Peru and figuring things out there. So, but he's just coming out with, he just came out with a book. He's come out with another book. He's written a number of books, but this year he's come with a new one on just the alpha theta protocol. And it's a very powerful protocol for PTSD. Actually, I think the book's called Alpha Theta and like trauma or PTSD. This one protocol, so we do neurofeedback, there's many different protocols, but this one protocol takes people into the subconscious, and that's where trauma is released at. So he has a whole book that just came out on that. And I would consider him a neuroscientist. He knows tons about the brain, but he's also a Zen Buddhist. He's familiar with shamanism. So he has this wide variety of interests and passions, which makes me work with him pretty much like perfect and ideal.
Have you ever had anybody go through the brain mapping and neural feedback, but then also attend an ayahuasca ceremony with Tiwaz Awakening?
Well, at Tiwaz Awakening, we include both. So we always have a
Oh.
pre-map and a post-map at our retreats.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're pretty much unique in the world in that. There might be like one other place that does the brain mapping, as far as I know, but we're the only ones that do the neurofeedback too. So we do pre and post maps. So every retreat, we're seeing how people change. And yeah, because then after the retreat, we go, hey, here's your brain, here's what's changed. And it's very interesting for people. Like, oh, wow, cool. Like,
this is your
and
brain
show them
on
directly.
drugs. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I show them like, in a documentary, we had a fighter. She was a Muay Thai fighter. She got KO'd, knocked out right before she came down. I saw that obvious head trauma in her brain. And then after the brain training and after the ayahuasca, it goes down significantly after 9 days. So that was really cool to see. And when people see that, they go, oh, wow, like something did happen. It wasn't just a hallucination. Like this is changing me or this is helping me in a certain way. That's why it's really powerful that way.
I think that tangible piece is that when people can say, "Oh, it's more than just a feeling," because there's the skeptics who call anything that's not standardized, practiced medicine as like woo woo. But I think that tangible piece and seeing it slowly start to come out in the research is starting to blur the lines for them a little bit, and they realize that like, hey, the stuff that we're doing has been around for thousands of years, but now science is starting to catch up with imaging that allows us to show what is actually happening while we're doing, integrating with plant medicine. But so you contributed to the research in this field. Do you want to talk a little bit about your contributions to the research?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it kind of surprises myself because not too long ago I was in Afghanistan and in infantry, and then I worked on the railroad for a little bit, construction, and now I'm doing research in this field. But I have a mentor and I have equipment, and there's not a whole lot of people doing it, at least the style that I'm doing it. So I use QEEG brain mapping for the neurofeedback field. So with this technology, a lot of technologies, like in the medical way they look at the brain, often they're looking for like a trauma in the brain or schizophrenia, but seizures, things like this. But we're looking for emotional states, emotional effect, which as a really neat tool to see the brain, because we can see like this depression, anxiety, things like that. So I published 2 studies in the last couple of years, the Ayahuasca and Wachuma, San Pedro. And as far as I know, it's the first Ayahuasca study to track change over time. And it's definitely the first study to ever brain image Wachuma, San Pedro. It's a cactus that has mescaline in it, maybe similar to peyote, but different alkaloids in it. And it's been really, really amazing to be able to make those contributions to the field.
Yeah, and I'll definitely post links to all that stuff because I want to take a deeper dive into this research. I try to summarize as best I can my takeaways from the research, and there's just so much that goes into this because it seems as though the research that's coming out, you can just see the researcher having this epiphany. Like, I cannot believe we haven't done this before. The writing is so passionate, which you don't find in research studies. They're always super dry. But you can almost get this sense of passion where the guy just or the researcher just wants to say holy shit. Like, I
Yeah,
think like that's kind of like the tone I get from a lot of the studies that I've read, especially so the Mayo Clinic, after they did that study, they published a series of lectures, and I think they're available on YouTube. I'll find them and post a link where they basically talk to the research like, this is the wave of the future. This is how we can get even better and less practicing medicine and more actually implementing medical science. So it's incredibly interesting. And anybody who can contribute to the research, I mean, we need that. So are you working on anything now? Is there anything else that you.
yeah. So right now we're doing a coca leaf study. It's not exactly a psychedelic, but
Mhm.
it's in Peru and they use it everywhere. It's very
Yeah.
sacred to them.
They chew
So
on it, right?
they chew on
Yeah.
coca leaves. Like
Yeah.
farmers use it, they do blessings to the mountain. And I went through the research as well with that, and no one's even brain imaged it at all. And I thought it was kind of interesting to look into this. That's actually a study we're doing this month. And then we'll see what we see. We'll see what's next. There's so much to do. There's so much to look into.
Yeah, I'm curious in the longitudinal studies as well because those are extremely interesting. Because I think a lot of people want immediate gratification in some of these things, and I think that the changes over time, like you had said, it's that overall delta that I think that we should be focusing on. But when I was down in South America, certain areas we couldn't go, right, because I was in the military, and one of the locals was telling me that there's coca farms out there, and it's not uncommon to just grab a leaf and like chew on it, and then they have their own like there is a sacred aspect to it and the appreciation and that's why they don't want like a bunch of crazy Navy and Marine folks going out there and causing havoc. But yeah, that's really interesting. So you're expanding kind of outside of ayahuasca into other plant medicines.
Yeah, and I'm in the country of Peru, so coca leaves is kind of ideal because it's
Yeah.
everywhere. In hospitals, you'll have coca leaves just getting their tea. They put
Mm-hmm.
coca leaves in hot water and you have coca leaf tea. Or the farmers, like every day they're chewing coca leaves. This is part of their
Mm-hmm.
culture. Um, But yeah, I want to look into different things too. I think peyote would be an interesting thing to look at. I think that whole all mescaline containing plants have like hardly any research on them, the brain imaging. So I think that's really interesting. And also, I want to build a database with ayahuasca. So my goal is to have enough brain maps. We can do a large like meta-analysis of like maybe hundreds, and that would be a really cool study to publish.
Yeah, I mean, it would be groundbreaking for the literature because a lot of that doesn't exist right now. Yeah, that would be really interesting. I'm curious about the peyote because I think that those sort of, I would call them Native American, but those traditions of Native peoples has been around for thousands of years, and they're starting to get some visibility. Like there's a few documentaries that came out about the process of that ritual and that tradition, and the sacredness of the peyote. So I'm curious. I'm curious how that would look. It'd be great to brain map those folks. Folks that have been doing it for so long.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's done that yet. I mean, I haven't looked at the research in the last year, but as far as I could tell, no one's ever brain imaged peyote with any kind of brain imaging.
Yeah,
So,
I think the science writes it off. It's extremely unfortunate, and that's why I think your research is important. But they write it off. They write it off as ancient traditions that are not grounded in science. And I'm like, we thought the same thing about a lot of the medicine that we use today. I mean,
oh yeah.
acupuncture is being prescribed by the VA. 50 years ago, they would have been like that woo woo stuff, right?
Well,
Post
even like in
Vietnam.
the 90s, I think it was like
Yeah.
really out there for most people.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was reading about acupuncture, when Nixon went to China, I think it was Nixon or maybe someone else, but I think it was Nixon. Um, he had acupuncture done on him, or maybe someone in his like administration, and it was in the newspapers. Like, what is this? This is bizarre. This is crazy stuff. Like, and
Yeah.
there's tons and tons of research on acupuncture, tons of stuff,
Yeah.
and so things are changing. That's really cool. The VA is doing. I really hope the VA eventually incorporates neurofeedback. I've met some people that have tried to do that and it hasn't been successful yet, as far as I know. But
Mhm.
it'd be really amazing if they do that because it's so powerful.
I mean, it's like literally an act of Congress. I remember when the psychedelic research was first happening at the VA. I went to UCSD, so a lot of, I worked at the TBI clinic, things like that. So because the campuses are so close, they share a lot. So when the psychedelic research was being done, it was actually a UCSD study, but they were using the VA labs because they got conjunction IRB approval or whatever it was, because the UCSD was studying veterans. So they kind of entered this deal with the VA to access the pool of veterans that they had down in La Jolla. And I just think about like even that was so like that nobody wanted to even pay attention to that study. I'm surprised UCSD got funding for it, but they definitely push the limit sometimes when it comes to research, thankfully. And I mean, like, my mom, I remember, like, 80s, 90s, even using things like turmeric as anti inflammatory rather than popping a Tylenol or something was seen as like so bizarre. And now, and now a bag of turmeric root is like $10 from Sprouts. So it's
Yeah,
like crazy that, here we are. Everybody's like, I told you so.
yeah. No,
But
that's really
yeah.
amazing and really cool. I mean, same thing with plant medicines like ayahuasca. When I first went down 10 years ago,
Mhm.
it was no one knew what I was doing. Like, I was going in the jungle hanging out with like, magicians and, you know.
Yeah.
But things are changing. It's been really cool.
Yeah, I'm curious now. The so can we talk a little bit about Tiwaz Awakening? I know we did a whole episode on it, but I'm curious now that I didn't. I think you mentioned it last time. I might have just forgotten that you guys do the kind of before and after brain mapping. Have you had anybody who's returned so you can kind of see what their, I guess, brain map looked like very beginning to like a few sessions later?
So, like, come back to the retreat, come back to another retreat.
Yeah, has anybody come back?
So, um, those studies don't really exist yet, and I haven't had like a return. I'm trying to think. I don't think I've had a return guest yet because we just started this last year, so
Oh,
or last
right.
year and a
Okay.
half. But no, like those studies need to be done because we have the pre and post, and the post is immediately afterwards. But we don't have those longer studies, like 3 months out, 6 months out, and only studies that exist are questionnaire studies, and those are still very small. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really amazing how much research needs to be done. It kind of blows my mind, but no one's ever brain imaged it long term, and that'll be really effective to know what's going on, because I think some people they carry the effect much longer, and some people
Yeah.
less. And there might be differences in the people and why that is, and the more insight we get, the more insight we'll have in healing. That's how I look at it as.
Yeah. I mean, even as a qualitative study, I was talking about this before with the with Brian McMahon, who is a shaman and philosopher, which is pretty cool. But we're talking about phenomenological qualitative studies that really look at the shared experience. So everybody who has attended Tiwaz Awakening and looking for patterns and how it's influenced them, even as a longitudinal study, through the use of interviews for, years or whatever the case is. But yeah, I kind of can't wait to see what how the research develops on that. I'm gonna be tracking it. I'm signed up to every other scientific journal, so I look forward to seeing that. I did want to talk a little bit about your movie, though. I'm not. I don't think it's out yet, but I know that you guys won an award.
We just won an award, Best Production in the South Beach Film Festival in Miami. So right now we're doing the film festival circuit, and I never thought I'd have a documentary, be doing this, but it's been very interesting and very rewarding. It should be out next year, I think. I'm not sure when we're releasing it yet,
Mhm.
but it's a very amazing, beautiful documentary about um, myself, a veteran, and a fellow veteran, my old unit meeting in Peru. So the name of it's called Cross Paths. So it's his path, my path crossing, and also ancient wisdom meets modern technology. That's the theme of it. So yeah, it's been very exciting. I'm really happy about it. So yeah.
Are you guys going to do any viewings? Because I'd love to host you guys in California if you were going to do some viewings.
Well, like we can definitely do that. We would love to come to California and do a viewing. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that'd be amazing.
that would be awesome. And there's such a huge veteran population here, so especially Marines. Yeah, I would totally host you guys out here. I have a really good venue that we can put the movie up, like in a movie theater,
Well, that
luxury
sounds
movie
great.
theater.
Actually,
Yeah.
I just did one in Iceland not too long ago, and
Oh,
that
that's
was really
cool.
cool.
Yeah.
And actually, it's interesting. My friend was doing a bachelor party out there, and they're all veterans as well. And I've always been called to Iceland as well, so it was really cool. We did a viewing out there, and I'm thinking next year we're going to do a retreat in Iceland too. So it's going to be a little
Oh,
bit different style than we've done, but they have a special Icelandic mushroom we want to work with,
interesting.
and also those Icelandic traditions, the runes and the Nordic Icelandic traditions. That'll be really cool.
Yeah, that's my next. I just picked up where's it at? It's on my bookshelf. The Nordic Mythology and Philosophy Bible. Uh, I try to buy when it comes to stuff like that. I try to buy those books from authors who are from there. Like
Yeah,
I don't want an Icelandic literature novel or whatever by like a British guy or like an
yeah, yeah.
American who's like not even from there. So um, yeah, I just picked that up because that's also pretty interesting to me. I think we talked about that last time too. So okay, yeah, I think that'd be pretty cool. I'd love to see you guys. Who was it? What the hell is his name? The guy from the Punisher did a little stint on the Bear TV show. Wow, I can't remember his name. He has a podcast too. He just did a showing of a short film that he helped create, and it was awesome. So I took away a lot of ideas from that. So if you guys do actually come out to California, I can pull a lot of what he did. Just the way they set it up, the vendors, they had vendors there. It was pretty cool. And there's a place out here called, they're a little private, non-chain luxury movie theater. I go once a week, and
Okay.
they do events there. And I've seen people that are doing birthday parties and their kids all want to watch Moana together. And they will, or like a home film or things like that. And they do that, which is pretty cool. So it'd be cool to host you guys out here because the film is awesome, or documentary. So
Yeah, thank you. We'd love to come down there.
yeah. So okay. So we talked a little bit about the future of your research, and and kind of that aspect of it. But what about Tiwaz Awakening? I know you guys are kind of still in your infancy, but it sounds like you guys are doing really well. What's the future hold for you?
Yeah, right now we're still in the early stage, and but basically get our name out there because I think we have a really beautiful retreat that's very unique because no one combines all the stuff we combine: jiu-jitsu, the adventure hiking, the brain mapping, and the neurofeedback, and especially geared for veterans and I'd say adventurers in general.
Mhm.
Someone's looking for something a little different, and that's what we provide. So I have a huge passion for this, and it's been building for 10 years. I feel very blessed. And we're running a couple more retreats this year. I think one in September and one in like December or January. I don't have that one yet. Our idea, hopefully, is to have it's all a building phase to have our own retreat center, have our own land, and run more regular retreats. So it's all a building process.
Yeah, I guess once I process my land in Wyoming, you guys could totally use that. Um, it's like untouched land. I think only one part of it has an access road. I've only visited it once when I bought it. And there's another nonprofit, veteran nonprofit, that uses it. My property ends at a mountainside. Obviously, I don't own the mountain as a parks
Yeah.
department, but the Special Operators Climbing Association, I am letting them use that to host some of their retreats. But
Okay.
yeah, we'll have to get you guys out there. I'm wondering, so what are the hoops you have to jump through? Because I'm sure there are tons to run a retreat like that in the United States. I mean, other than the obvious barriers with the medicinal aspect of it.
I don't really know yet because I haven't looked into it. Because 10 years ago, you couldn't run a retreat in the United States. That's why I was in Peru.
Yeah.
And now, it seems like the last few years, I've seen a lot more retreats in the United States. I've seen advertisements for it. It kind of surprised me because this wasn't a thing at all. So I'm going to have to look into it more and the laws and stuff like that. I know there's been underground ceremonies for a long time. I mean, I had some friends in like Washington State that used to do that. When I first looked at this 10 years ago, you can't really find a place on the internet. You got to know somebody or something. So
Yeah.
this is all a new thing to me too. But eventually, um, Colorado might be a good option too because I know some people out there
Yeah.
have retreat spot and stuff like that. So that could be really cool. But I haven't looked into the United States yet.
Yeah, I know from my understanding, a lot of these sorts of retreats, I wouldn't even call them retreats. They're done on tribal land. They're part of the tribal culture and ceremonies, so it was not uncommon to hear about that sort of stuff happening on native territory. I'm curious if that would be an option for hosting something like that, but I know right now because of the classification of certain plant medicines that unless it's in like a controlled approved setting, it's difficult. Like even the psychedelic research, I mean, I think it was like 12 years of fighting the federal government to be able to do that. And that's not even a retreat. That's like, I mean, they have these cozy rooms with sofas and beds and stuff like that
Yeah.
to conduct the research. But yeah, I'd be curious. I've been on a few other wilderness retreats, I'd call them, or nature retreats.
Yeah.
And now a lot of those retreats also have like the CBD component to it or like a THC
Yeah.
component. So it's like, which one do you want to go on? I haven't done any of that other stuff, but yeah, I heard a lot of really good things about retreats stateside. I just curious if there's other aspects of what you do that could be done here.
No, I'd love to expand here and maybe do a few retreats in the States every year. And Wyoming's beautiful. I love the state. And I
Yeah.
used to work out there a bit in the mountains. So I really enjoy it. But that stuff, I mean, my whole vision eventually was to bring this stuff back to the States. And
Mhm.
now it seems the laws are changing a little bit and the culture's changing a little bit. So I have to start thinking about that more and plan it out more because I think that'd be really powerful for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely have a bit of a road ahead in getting politicians to realize that we're not trying to hold many Woodstocks. It's like a less than 15 person type event in a controlled environment with professionals. So I'd be curious to see what that looks like. But other than Peru and potentially Iceland, are there any other countries that are doing something similar or that accept this sort of treatment?
Well, Costa Rica's a big one. I know that.
Okay.
I was actually thinking about flying down to Costa Rica, just kind of checking out what's going on down there. There's many retreats
Mhm.
down there. Actually, I have friends in Portugal too. They run retreats up there with ayahuasca, and there's a little in Colombia. I think like Ecuador as well. I think just Peru is one of the bigger ones, but there's other countries as well. So
Yeah, I know that John Davis has some veteran. He's a veteran network out in Costa Rica too, and I think Panama. But yeah, I mean, I'm only familiar of this, I guess, by association because I'm from South America, but not from Peru. So, just understanding the cultures of neighboring countries. So, yeah, that's going to be incredibly interesting. So, I'm curious. I guess, kind of moving kind of back to the cognitive side of things. Have you had anybody who has attended your retreat and has gone through all of this that has presented your brain mapping and neural feedback to like a clinician?
um,
I'm just curious what the salty dog neurologist has to say.
yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't think offhand. But I'm thinking that they've gone and told their doctor or something like that. And actually, when people tell their doctors, I'm kind of surprised. They're like, "Oh yeah, you should go do that." And that was not a thing, even a few years ago. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting. Like, I'm going to do this ayahuasca retreat, and oh, cool. Like that was not a thing before. So it's cool to hear.
Yeah. When my doctor prescribed acupuncture, she has since received a well deserved promotion. So she's not my primary care anymore. But when we had first looked at ways to treat my PTSD, she went completely holistic. She was like, well, there's acupuncture. We can send you to a massage therapist. And I was like, what? Since when does the VA have any of this? I was
I didn't know
expecting.
that. That's cool.
Yeah. And then, the doctor right after her just sent me medication to my mailbox. Didn't even tell me, like, oh, you have PTSD? Here's the standard cookie cutter collage or assortment of the Skittles that you have to take. And I was like, what the hell? Why is the VA sending drugs to my mailbox? I had to call my new PCM to find out what it was.
Yeah,
Just a little bit of a culture shock because I had just gotten so used to the prescription of like holistic stuff. So
yeah.
yeah, I'd be curious to see what I call them salty dog because a lot of neurologists, besides having gone through like 20 years of school, they're a lot of them aren't as progressive or open to alternative medicine than I would like. But
No, it's a new thing.
yeah,
Uh,
and I know this is probably going to be a bit of a shorter episode compared to last time because we covered a lot last time.
yeah.
But are there any studies that you recommend someone who's interested in this, resources or certain studies other than your own, or including your own, that you would recommend for someone to look into?
I mean, I like my studies, but the reason I like my
Yeah,
studies
yeah,
because it's a certain way of looking at the brain, right? So a lot of neurological studies, it's going to be very maybe complex for someone that's not in the field, whereas mine,
hmm
I think, is more easily read by a layperson. It's more clear what's going on. I'm not really going deep into network connections and different aspects of the brain like that. I'm showing brain imaging that's pretty easy to follow, so I like that a lot. Um, I think there's
yeah. I think lower barrier to entry is good.
yeah, yeah. I think there's also studies, I don't remember their names, but if you look at the default mode network, like mushrooms, for example, there's been work how the mushrooms quiet the default mode network. And this is the same thing that happens in meditation, for example. So this is idea that the self becomes more activated, the sense of self, so that psychedelics, mushrooms, for example, they lower those barriers. So you're not so much ego conscious. You're much more one with the world. And we can see that in the brain patterns, which I think is really cool. And I think also if you research, I might have to send you a couple of studies. There's one study I really found interesting on like peak experiences and went through all the literature throughout history on what these experiences are like. I think that's very interesting because mainstream science, we don't think of consciousness that way, that one experience can change someone's life. And what does it take to have that experience? Psychedelics and plant medicines are one avenue, but these experiences happen many different ways and they happen to human beings forever. So what goes into that experience? I think that's really important. And also keep that in mind when we're working with people too. We want people to have those certain experiences that can like shift them so they can do what they need to change their life. That's how I look at it as.
Yeah, I'll have to, yeah, send me whatever studies you have because what I'm trying to do, I've been putting out like my own like abstract of certain studies, but I would like to actually post the studies along with my highlights to help people kind of absorb the material, or pull in, I guess, just my viewpoint on it's not that it's the right one, but just to kind of facilitate any sort of like critical thinking as it relates to neurological studies, because they can be hard to follow. And reading the abstract and the discussion doesn't really give you as much insight as you think. So I like that your studies have a lower barrier to entry, where it requires a little less of a PhD to
Yeah.
read.
Another thing, I think modern studies, I think they overemphasize certain qualities and aspects. They want to like really isolate one alkaloid within the
Mm.
psychedelic drug, or whatever they want to call it. I don't consider it a drug, but they want to isolate one alkaloid. They want to study someone like in a clinic and reduce all these variables. And obviously, that makes scientifically that makes a lot of sense. But in many ways, what I'm doing is field research. So it's the environment, it's the shaman, it's all these plant medicines together, and we want to look at the experience holistically. I think that's very important, because what we're experiencing is a holistic experience, and we might be losing things we isolate them too much. I think that lens is important, but I think we need other lenses as well, because the holistic approach, for example, I've seen data sets, or I've observed things I don't think anyone's observed yet, but that's because I'm looking at it through that lens.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioning this, because again, talking to Brian McMahon, um, he mentions the hermeneutic kind of approach to understanding things, that everything can't be scientific and in a vacuum. Human experience and the lived experience and the feelings and the personal or subjective results of whatever is happening, of that, that lived experience, is just as important as the data. So that qualitative aspect to a quantitative research design would be incredibly important in this aspect. So yeah, no, I would love to have both of you guys on here. I think that you and him, he's like, he says he looks like Dumbledore. He's like an older guy who's been a shaman and taekwondo black belt, and now he's retired. He just has a podcast, but and paints. But he has a similar take on things. He's not conducting research or hosting events or ceremonies, but it's just interesting that you two, who don't know each other, have an outlook that I think is so important to this field, of like neurology and helping people through whatever trauma they're experiencing.
Yeah,
So,
my mentor's journal, the New Mind Journal, and he goes into a lot about experimentation and the philosophy behind it. And he goes into a
mhm,
lot what you just said, that human beings are very unique, and there's so much to us that we don't really understand yet. And there's actually this whole quantum realm too. So
mhm,
the standard of the double blind study, this gold standard, and obviously has its effects and reasons, but also has its limitations. And I think it was 40% of those studies actually are not effective or relevant. They have huge flaws in them. So it's important to have
mhm,
different lenses in the way we look at things, because the human being is very unique. And when I write the studies in the literature section, I'm always emphasizing that, like, we're looking at the holistic process of what's going on here,
yeah,
because and many times there's an illusion that we can even isolate these things. There's always variables that we
mhm,
can't account for. So, but for me, I noticed that ayahuasca seems to really help with attention, ADD, and
mhm,
that's because I was studying the way I was. I don't think other people have noticed that. Now that I've seen that, if someone else wants to go into that study more and do like an individualized study with people with ADD, that could be really cool. But if it wasn't for that initial exploratory study, people would have noticed that. So that's what's important.
yeah. No, that's I like new fields of research, especially since they kind of push the barriers. So I think this is great. So if someone wanted to, okay, so we talked about how someone can do some research and finding studies. If someone's ready to learn more, to hit you up about brain mapping and all of this, where would they go?
So I have two websites. Tiwaz Awakening is our retreat website, Tiwaz, like the rune. Um, that's where we do retreats, and also we have neuro enlightenment. And that website we have the neurofeedback. And sometimes we partner with retreats with brain mapping and neurofeedback, but also say people aren't ready to go down to Peru yet, or say they have a family member that's dealing with Alzheimer's or ADD or something, we can work with anyone remotely, and that has been very powerful for people. Or sometimes people with severe PTSD, before they come to Peru, it's a really good idea to do the brain training before they arrive. That way they can have a more
So is that neuro enlightenment or neuralenlightenment.com or
neuro enlightenment.
neuro enlightenment? Okay, I'll make sure I put a link to that as well. Yeah, no, I think this has been a really interesting conversation, and I'm glad we were able to kind of continue our conversation from last time, because we definitely went down the neuro rabbit hole a little bit in that episode.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, thanks for being here. Is there anything that you want to talk about before we wrap things up?
No, that's it. Yeah, I mean, if someone's interested in coming down to retreats, please message us. Like I said, we're probably doing one in Iceland next year, I think. I'm really excited about. Probably around the same time this next year during like the summer solstice. So that should be really cool. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I super appreciate it. It's great talking to you, and you have great questions, which I appreciate. It makes me think.
Yeah, of course, and I'll make sure that I keep the newsletter subscribers and everybody updated on what's happening with you guys, especially if you do any of the film showings and about your next available retreat. So I'll post that for our subscribers, and I'll post it in the W3 magazine for anybody who wants to keep up with you guys.
Hey, appreciate
Oh,
it.
as a matter of fact, that's right. You wrote an article for W3 magazine. I have to shout you out for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
So
it.
yeah, that'll be in our July issue. So if anybody wants to read your article, yeah, they can check out W3 magazine. We have a digital and a hard copy.